thanks everybody for coming. I'm Susan Kapczynski-Gaylord. I think I know a lot of people here. The talk is called Art Lessons, Reflections from an Artist's Life. It's something that I've been giving for about 5 years or so, and the name is sort of new this year, calling it Art Lessons, because partly from, I've been working as an artist for 35 years, and partly from the experience of doing some talks about it, looking back about my work, I kind of drew from that some of the art lessons that I learned, but not art like learning how to paint or draw, but the kind of emotional side of things and things. So that's where the title came from. And I did this little book in the past year called Art Lessons, which has 7 short essays, and they each start with a quote. So this has got a little bit of this, but it's mostly kind of the story of my work. So one of the things, when I was doing this book, I went and I found quotes that went with the essays. And this Sound Your Instruments of Joy is a line from a traditional carol, traditional English carol that I've heard from Noel Singly Clear, which is a group that's wonderful if you like traditional music. I highly recommend them. But when I thought about it, the idea of sounding your, I mean, it sounds really simple, but to me, I realized that for a long time for me, the question was, what's my instrument? I mean, it's great, the idea of sounding, but what are your instruments of joy? What makes you happy? And for me, some people, I think, start out with gifts towards music, towards art, towards something, engineer, whatever that they follow, but I was not one of those people. I didn't have any real clear sense. And so when I was a child, this is why we don't have it. This is me in Rowan, New Jersey, at the kitchen counter with my coloring book. And I loved my coloring books. I really loved coloring books, and I was known in my family as a wonderful colorer. Because I could always say little did they know what would happen. And I have, this was kind of one of the newsprint kind of coloring books, but my favorite one was one that had actually, it was like separate plates, not a bound book. And it was a cover stock, and it was kind of a nice smooth paper, and they were all pictures of flowers, and they were all like peony and narcissus and real flowers. And I was really close to my grandfather as a child, and I spent a lot of time in his garden. And so I loved these garden flowering, doing these pictures of flowers. And the thing when I think about it now is that I never thought, oh, I should go out and draw a picture of the garden or make a picture of the garden. For me, I was sort of that whole thing with the coloring book and the thing, and that just sort of really summed up it kind of did it all for me. And so this is what I'm going to show you, just to not belabor the, was not like really a budding artist type, but this is something that I did. I put this an example of that I could do something pretty awful when I started, and that I actually was somebody with this weird kind of a way of having a lot of nerve though, because I turned this in, and I was a junior in college. I was an English major, and I said I don't want to write an essay for this one or a paper. I'm going to do a photo essay of a poem by Walt Whitman. So I did this with like terrible lettering, which I had dabbled in high school. I was so excited about this picture with my Instamatic camera of throwing the ball up and taking a picture. I thought that was and then the arrangement and the design, the layout. I mean, it's crazy. But so this is kind of where I started from. So that's where I was a baseline.
You mean that's hope for anyone?
What word is
Rondour? So, yeah. So one of the things was, and just something, so I was an English major in college, I graduated, I worked in an office, I taught swimming for the Boston School Department for 4 years. And then I was unemployed, I had stopped teaching, I was collecting unemployment, I was unemployed, and I got a letter from a friend who said, I have a friend who has a wedding album, and that she would like to have something lettered on it, and I remember you did that, would you want to do it? So I got out my old Spiegel handbook, and this was the style that I did at the time, Old English, and I practiced it a little bit, and I said, sure, I'll do it. But once I started on that, I really got hooked on calligraphy. And so I started out with my Spiegel book, and then I got a lot more books. I had workbooks that I filled through, I had kind of office, and I would, my husband tried to go to work in the morning, and I would sit down at the table, and I would just work all day. I would just practice and practice and practice. And what interested me, what attracted me at first were actually the words, because having been an English major, I loved words. And having been an English major, I got really sick of kind of dissecting everything and analyzing everything so much. And so for me to be able to instead of having to write a 5 or 10 page paper where you got to the point where you were analyzing the point of every syllable in a sonnet, I was able to just sit there and write out the words and really kind of savor them and enjoy them. When I look at it now, the thing is, so the first thing was the words, and then the next thing was really getting into the letters. And the thing about this is these letters are, I mean, when I look at it now, I remember how much I love the words and how much I love doing it. I look at it and I see it's very stiff, it's very awkward, it's you know, not particularly good. So this is something that I did just kind of for the show, of just sort of where, you can see, I think, a lot more, that there's a lot more flowing written in it. And the thing about calligraphy, when I taught it at Rivier College, and I used to say to my students at the beginning of the semester, you're going to find that this is a lot more like learning how to play an instrument than it is what you're used to in an art class, because repetition is a huge part of it, and you're really working just like in music. There are this limited number of notes. In calligraphy, there are 26 letters, and there might be different hands, but you're always going over and working on those things. And a big part of it is there's just like in all art, there's the learning how to do it, but a big part of learning how to do it is learning how to see. And the thing I think that's interesting about calligraphy is that you're working with these 26 letters, so you're using a lot of the principles of design, of negative space, of a lot of things, but it's all playing out in this very limited little space of 26 letters and one letter at a time. And so the thing I think that enabled me to, because I pretty much worked from books, I didn't take classes, I learned from books. The thing that's really important is to develop what I call the critical eye, to be able to look at what you've done and analyze it and see, is this what it should be? How should I improve it? What should I do? And I think I like to think I was pretty good at that. And the kind of the negative side to that is to have your critical facility so in tune that you criticize everything to the point at which it's really hard to keep going, that you just get discouraged. So I think for me, I think the whole thing with the critical eye is to use it and everything, but to not let it overwhelm you. And a big part of it is, which is sort of a theme through kind of a lot of what I kind of feel is like, if the work is the most important thing to you, not what it looks like at the end or something, but just doing the work is the most important, then that will just sort of keep you going. So I'll just show you a few things. In the beginning, I did a lot of very traditional things. This was lifted straight from William Morris. I'm not sure how totally, I mean, it could very well be a complete copy, but it's very close to a William Morris kind of thing. And this is a poem by Seamus Heaney. This is the Untitled, which I really love doing. And in the beginning, I did a lot of like a complete poem or something like that. And then as I moved on, I got to the point where I would do more quotes and incorporated other things. So I had an exhibit at the Concord Library in Concord, Mass, and I did a whole thing of just Concord authors. And this is one that's his life in Bowenberg is the sweetest. It's a quote from Thoreau. And to do the white kind of bone thing, that was done with a bottle of whiteout and just kind of. I took a workshop with a German calligrapher named Karl Kerfer. He was squirting things out of bottles all over. He had ink and everything like that. So I came home and of course I had to experiment with that too. And then this is also another one from the Concord quotes. This is Margaret Fuller. And so I sort of started out with the words, and then I got interested in the letters, and then I got much more interested in the gesture and the movement. And that eventually led me to getting even more abstract. And this is just the word love written many times. So I kept on, I eventually ended up feeling like I needed to move on from calligraphy. And part of it was that I really liked the gesture and the movement, but going that far to abstraction just really wasn't quite for me. And I think the reason sort of goes back to the words and the English major thing. And if I thought about it, it's like there's an aboutness. What I'm looking for doesn't have to have words, but it has to be about something. And if you think about it, people will say you take a photograph of a tree, or you paint a picture of a tree. But when you write a poem about something, it would be about a tree. And there's something about being involved with words that has what I just think of as aboutness. And when I got more and more abstract, I was missing that. And the other reason I was kind of becoming disenchanted with calligraphy, and I'll mention her later, but Jenny Hunter Grote, I consider my mentor. She just passed away this past year. and she was a calligrapher, and she's a painter, a dancer, and one of her things she talked about calligraphy, because it is such an interpretive art, if you're working with other people's words. And so she talked about the difference between an interpretive artist, and her example of that was Margot Fontaine, the ballerina, and an originating artist, and her example of that was Martha Grant, the choreography and modern dancer. And I realized, I didn't have those words then, but I didn't want to be an interpretive artist anymore. I really wanted to do work that kind of was mine, that was coming from me. And so I still stayed with calligraphy, and then the next thing I did, so the first work that I consider really truly my own was a series called Childbirth Journey. And this was 1985, was a really kind of a tumultuous year for me. My mother died in January, and my first child was born in June. And I know it's hard to say that, but I did a series of 15 pieces called Childbirth Journey. It was a pastel drawing, and with line quotes from my journal about the experience of, mostly about the childbirth journey part. And so I did this, and as I did it, I showed at the Newburyport Art Association. And it was interesting, the words, it was well received in general, but too much information was not like a catchphrase of that time yet. But there were people who came in who definitely felt that. Like, I do not need to know all this about her whole experience happening. But anyway, but I felt good about it, and I felt really good about it. But when I brought it home, I didn't want to put it on the wall. First of all, it was a lot of pieces and I didn't know where to put them, but it just didn't seem right to be on the wall all the time, and I couldn't picture anybody else having it on their wall all the time. And part of it was, it just seemed like the kind of thing you wanted to go, experience, and then leave, and just not have it there all the time. So that is what led me to the book, because I thought, aha, this would be, the books is what like that. You open it up, you experience it, and then you close it. So I had already taken a bookmaking class, and actually it was somebody who lives, I think she still lives in Newburyport, she didn't then, Catherine Bado-Costello, and she taught a class at the Cambridge Center for Adult Education. And the main focus of the class was learning how to do like a small book, but it had a hardcover. We used rabbit skin glue. It was very traditional binding, which didn't really appeal to me that much, but we did a little bit with simple structures, which I loved. And so I kind of dabbled around with it a little bit, but nothing serious of thinking that that was the art. It was more just a play thing. And I used to, when I was teaching calligraphy, I always had my students do a book project once a semester. And so that kind of, anyway, so I got into the whole idea of the book. And I have a little thing to I'm just going to quickly read this, even though it is annoying when people read in slide projections. But this is kind of sums up what I felt, what drew me to books, what I felt about it. Books are intimate. They welcome personal encounters. Books are humble. They fulfill their potential closed as well as open. Books have depth. They are rich with the possibilities of endless variation. Books have spirit. They are dwelling places for our thoughts and dreams. So to me, at that point, books sort of just seemed like a good place for all the things I was thinking. And my first books all had words. This was a book called Contradictions, Jack Kerouac, Lowell, and River. And it has quotes from Jack Kerouac that were on vellum, tracing vellum. The image is from one photograph of Pawtucket Falls in Lowell by Betsy Bolton. And I did a lot of work with the photocopier then, and then it had pages with just text that were my reflections. And so this is the background of one of them with the thing. So I did a lot with the photocopier. I would take something, I would copy it, and then I would recopy it a lot of times to break down the image, or I would enlarge it, do different things with it, and that's sort of where that came from. I started this, I did it first as a one-of-a-kind book, and then I did it as an edition book. And a lot of people in bookmaking, book arts, do editions. So you come up with a design, a layout, a plan, and you make then 10, 20, 50, 100 of the same design. And the idea is, one, you can, it's closer to publishing what people are thinking about books. It's also something that you, for the work that you put in, you can sell each book for less, but have more, over the life of this whole project, you can presumably make something. But it turned out that I really didn't like the second part of the project. I loved the first part, which was creating the book and the content and laying everything out and getting it all ready. And then you've got it, and then you you say, oh, I think I'll do a limited edition of 100, and then you have to bind 100 books. So I realized pretty quickly that that wasn't really kind of what I wanted to do, and I still have, I think I did this, I don't know, it was like 1990 or something, and I still have unbound pages from this book, from these books. But so that was my initial entry was very much about words. And then with the whole photocopier thing, then I got involved with photocopier imagery. But the other thing about it was I decided that my books, if I was going to be a real book artist, I should make books with hardcovers. So I got some bookbinder's board, and I covered it just to see what it would be like. So I covered the board, and I decided I really loved the board itself, and I didn't want them to be the covers, I wanted them to be the pages, and that would be what the book was actually made out of. So this is something that I call Transcendence. I did 2 versions of it. And this was a photograph from a book that I had copied from Angkor Wat of a Buddha's face. And then that had the hair at the top, and then the parts of the faces were from a photograph of my mother when she was a young woman. And then another one that I did was using the photocopier imagery again. This is the Buddha's lips from the Angkor Wat photo. And then that is actually like the side of my head. I had the photocopier, I was leasing one, I had it in the house, and my son and I did an alphabet book on the photocopier. So we were copying our ears for E. I looked, and all of a sudden I found out that I had all this gray hair. And I was really surprised. And so I did this whole thing. It was meant to be a reflection on aging and the eternal quality of the Buddha. And so I put it into a small book. And because I was still such a word person, on the back of each one of those, I had written something kind of explaining what I felt about the aging, about where the imagery came from, what I was thinking. And a friend of mine who's a poet, Valerie Wolfeld, who used to live in Newburyport, and she came over and she looked at it, and she just looked at the front, and she said, well, I can see so much in this. I could really spend a lot of time looking at this. And when she left, I decided that I really it was really not right for me to be telling people what to think. And so I pasted over the back of all the words. So it became just this. And when I did this, I mean, it seems, I don't know what it seems, but it was like a really big deal for me because I had been reading things about books, and everybody talked about books about being about sequence. And you kind of turn a page and something happens. And I did this where you didn't really turn any pages, and there was no sequence at all. It was just kind of the same thing. And I was really nervous, like, should I be doing this at all? And then I entered it. There used to be a show that the Cultural Council put on at City Hall. And it was over a weekend, and it was open to all the artists in town. People would bring their work, and it wasn't jury, but there was a judge. And I actually won first prize for this book. And I was really surprised, and a whole lot of other people were really surprised. But it was really a big boost to me at that time when I was so insecure to get that. But sort of harping on that whole theme of the work is the most important thing. One of the books that's been influential to me is Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by Shinru Suzuki. And one of the things he says in that is encouragement is medicine. It's like medicine. And you should never mistake it for food. So that, getting an award, getting validation for your work is great, but it shouldn't be what is the food and what gets you going. It's just a little kind of bit of encouragement. So I'm going to go on from here. I did a whole series that is probably the work that I'm most known for are the spirit books. And kind of somewhere in this thing, the whole idea of this quote from Rilke, it's from Letters to a Young Poet, became really important to me. And this is from the little book. But I'm just going to read to you this quote because it kind of just sort of, I think, a relationship with patience and time is really important. A year doesn't matter, 10 years are nothing. To be an artist means not to compute or count. It means to ripen as the tree which does not force its sap, but stands unshaken in the storms of spring with no fear that summer might not follow. It will come regardless, but it comes only to those who live as though eternity stretches before them, carefree, silent, and endless. I learn it daily, learn it with many pains for which I am grateful. Patience is all. So these spirit books, which use natural materials, started, and a lot of these things are not indirect. This is also when I was making some of the other books. But I made the first one in 1992, but the seeds were really sown in at least 4 years earlier. And one of the things that came from it was we did this massive pruning at our house, and we had a mountain of brush in our driveway. And as we were cutting it and breaking it down, I felt just such an attraction to the sticks and the vines and the pieces. And some of them were kind of sculptural looking, but some of them were just plain old pieces of sticks or vines. And so I brought a whole lot of them into the studio. The basket's newer, these are what's still there. But I brought a whole lot into the studio. And I kept on trying to think about, sort of what I felt about them. And Joseph Campbell, Bill Moyers did the series The Power of Myth, where he interviewed Joseph Campbell. And then there was a book about it, and I'm sure I didn't remember it from the show, so it would have been from the book. But in it, Joseph Campbell says that the mythology is based on the idea that there's an invisible world that supports the visible world. And so that's kind of how I came to feel about these sticks, that somehow they were messengers, representatives of that invisible world. And I had to somehow figure out how to honor it in the work. And in 1988, I spent a week at Green Gulch Zen Center with Jenny Hunter Grote, who I consider my mentor. And it was a calligraphy workshop. It was called Knowing Not Knowing. We did some Zen meditation. And we also did calligraphy. About halfway through, I just kind of said, I want to be outside. And I went outside and I just played with sticks and composed little environments and stuff. So I had that feeling, too, that I was trying to bring into it. And then it took me a long time, like 4 years, to get to the thing where I actually made something that I thought really worked as art. And so the first thing is, again, this goes back into the, like, where did she get the nerve for this? But, so I wasn't letting go, because that was a little book there with some things. This was something with some words and some things. This was at the Art Association. This I exhibited in the faculty show at Virginia College. But anyway, I was, processing and learning and growing. So the next thing I did was I took a lot of these little pieces of roots, and I took them and I put them in boxes, and I called them spirit boxes, and kind of liked them, but I felt like they really kind of weren't quite it either. And so I was still kind of struggling to figure out what I was doing. And then I went to an exhibit, and unfortunately I meant to look up the name of this artist and I forgot. But I saw that there was an exhibit of Japanese sculptors working with wood at Southern Maine University of Southern Maine. And so I went to see this, and when I saw this, I kind of realized it didn't lead me to anything. I just realized that what he had done is he had taken, there was a whole lot of sticks there and pieces of wood that were kept intact in their form, but yet that was very much transformed, so that it made it a separate piece of art. And when I thought about my little boxes, they really weren't transformed. They really didn't take it that one step further to make it what I would consider a piece of art. So then finally 4 years later, I made the first of the spirit books. And they are cradles of some sort with books resting in them. And I have no idea sort of how I got the idea to make them. And I think that's something, that kind of aha moment where you're working on something for a really long time, and it could be art, it could be anything. And all of a sudden you kind of come up with it, like, oh, I'll do this. But you have no real memory of the steps how you got to there. And another book that has been really important to me is The Gift by Lewis Hyde. And the way he describes that moment in there, he says the missing grace has been bestowed, which I think is a beautiful way to say it. So I started this series. I used handmade, I don't make the paper, but they're all handmade papers from around the world. The paper there is a paper from Mexico called amate paper. And I love the texture and the look of the paper, but it also, and feel, but it also has this very rich history, because it's the paper that the Aztecs and the Mayans made, and it's still kind of made the same way today. So I kind of look at them as a two-part thing, and I've come to look at them even more so. But in one way, they're a sculpture, because they're three-dimensional and have sculptural quality. But they're also very much a book. So every book it does have pages. It is book-like. And what I'm going to do now is just, and again with the reading thing, but I've worked on these I made the first one in 1992. And then I made them, and in 2005 I had a show, and I thought I was going to stop making them, because it just seemed like I should. And then about 4 years later, I missed making them, so I started making them again. But one of the things about working on something for a really long time is you get to really kind of hone your artist statement. You have a lot of time to develop it. So I feel like I've really kind of gotten it down exactly, so I want to read it. The spirit books bring together my love of the book and my response to the natural world that we see and the invisible one that lies behind it. I feel a deep connection to older powers as I gather twigs, branches, vines, and roots. Using them to cradle books, I link them to the long-standing tradition of books as testaments of faith and belief. Each page is a meditation that echoes nature with both repetition and variety. Reading the book is meant to be a contemplative experience that takes the reader out of the everyday world and into a state of gratitude and reverence. So this is a close-up of that. So I use stitching and beads and sometimes weaving paper in and punched holes in beads. And one of the things that I feel about them is that I started out, and I love detail, and I can sit for hours and hours and hours and stitch everything. But I've never been interested in really traditional bookbinding, partly because I really don't like having to be precise. So that this, it's very detailed, but there's no precision thing going on here. And in traditional bookmaking, precision is key. Everything has to be just perfectly cut, perfectly lined up, perfectly everything. And so the wonderful thing about this is that they're very liberating because everything is torn, there's no cut edges, I tear all the paper, and if everything doesn't line up exactly right, that's fine. I mean, it's meant to be organic. So the whole thing of I think I had a thing, especially when I was doing calligraphy, which is very much about meeting up with a model. You have this model of the letter that is the ideal, and so much of what you're doing is trying to reach that ideal yourself. And so it was really so freeing to have something that, one, I don't have any vision of what it's going to look like at the end. So that was another thing when I did calligraphy, or other things where you kind of have a layout and a plan, and then you do a rough sketch and then you fill it in. These just sort of completely develop organically, and they don't have. So one of the good things about that is you don't know where it's going to go. And so, I mean, at the end, either it gets someplace you like or it doesn't. But it's not like it didn't match up to something, or this whole thing dealing with the kind of perfection thing there. And so one of the things is, so one of the things is that I found, so they're all numbered, but there are lots of numbers that aren't exist anymore because I would look at it and decide it didn't work, I didn't like it, or whatever. And this was one of the ones. And I think looking at it now, I mean, the fact that I didn't have any branches or any cradle is definitely a part of the problem. But sometimes I found that seeing a two-dimensional image, seeing the photograph was what really helped me clarify what I felt was not quite working about something, or that it wasn't working. So I think I had some suspicions when I saw the object itself that this was not really something I thought belonged in the series. But when I saw the picture, it was like, no, this has got to go. So I took the book apart, and this is nestled in blackberry vines, roots, and lilac roots. And so I used part of that in here. And the way that I do the books is that I start with the cradle, and then I find a book pretty much working on the size, kind of a combination of what size the book is going to be and what paper I'm going to use. And then I figure that out, and then I figure out how I'm going to embellish or what I'm going to put on the pages, and then the whole thing gets put together at the end. And then I make a base, and then the last thing is I name the books. So this is Spirit Book number 43, Renewed Wisdom. And the renewed comes from the fact that the book was reused from another book. And the wisdom comes from the beads here on the side. Those are myrrh, which is what the wise men brought to the Christ child. So that's kind of where the wisdom came from. And so this is part of also the patience theme. So when I first did them, the first ones I did them, they had no base under them. It was just this cradle, whatever, just lying on a pedestal. And then I decided that it needed something to kind of offset it. So then I made a base that was big enough that it extended beyond any part of the book or the cradle. And this one has actually stayed this way because the whole thing was attached. But then at some point I looked, and I think that might have been a photograph too, I looked at it and I thought, the bases are too big, because the book should be a more dominant feature, and sometimes the bases look like they were bigger. So then I went and I can't remember how many I had at the time, but I remade all the bases. And then I did a piece, which was not one of the spirit books, but something unrelated, and I had done something with 2 levels, and it had kind of a raised kind of an altar-like feeling. I thought, and that's what the spirit book really needs. So then I went back and remade the basis for all the spirit books that I had, and then everything I did. That's where the whole patience. But it's patience. It's patience, not like I know what the end is going to be, and I'm just patiently waiting for it. But patience, like I don't know what the end is going to be, and I'm just going to relax and let it happen. So this is one of the raised bases. And then kind of the last thing, one of the things I feel, just that whole idea of it not having to be perfect, I kind of look at it that what my goal is kind of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, the baby bears, it's just right. That's kind of what I want. So it's not that I'm not thinking like what's going to make this more beautiful or what's going to make this more, but just that all the pieces really work together and that there's kind of a harmonious whole. And I think that that's one of the things as an artist that's really, and any kind of creative work, that you have that chance to create this little bit of harmony in this world that has so much disharmony, that it's one place to really be able to experience that.
Are there beads on there as well as fairy?
This one has on the edges, those are pods from the rue, and then those are some beads that are made of horn on the thing. So one of the things is sometimes I also, I've added things to the cradle sometimes and then sometimes not. So in 2005 I had a show at Regis College, and it was really wonderful. That's when I thought I wasn't going to make them anymore. They did an incredible job of displaying everything, and there were 3 different sizes of pedestals that were standardized, but it was designed in a way that the top of every pedestal was a separate piece, so it was made to exactly fit to go with each piece. So it really gave it just an amazing look. And before that, I used to, when I exhibited the work before, I would just kind of put a pedestal here, one there, just kind of spread them around. And then I had a show at the Center for Book Arts in New York, and they had a glass case. And I really don't like exhibiting them behind glass or plexi or anything, because I feel like there is a certain energy that comes from them that is blocked by that. But, it was a glass case, but when I put them all together, they were so close to each other that I really felt that there was an energy and kind of an interaction between them. So that when I had this show, and whenever I've shown them since, I put them into groupings so that they're not just sort of isolated, but they're kind of together in a group. So then I decided, so 2005, I said, I'm not going to make these anymore. It's like a really big part of my identity, so I'm feeling kind of a little lost. And then the other big part of my identity was teaching bookmaking in schools. And it was kind of waning. If you don't actively pursue getting work, at some point you don't get work, which is what happened to me. So I was kind of feeling a little bit like, I'm not sure if I really want to do this, so I wasn't really pursuing it, and then I just got less and less work. And I still would have had some, but at some point I said, I'm just going to not do this anymore. So then I felt like that was a big part of my identity. So now I feel like I'm this floating identityless person out there. So this is kind of the work since then. And one of the things, too, is that what I've sort of talked about up until now, I've got some distance from it. So it's easy to look back and sort of see the threads and see how everything led to each other, which it might not have seemed like it at the time. But now I'm not as far from a lot of this, so it seems sort of more amorphous. But one of the things that I did start to do was to take part in outdoor sculpture and bonsai. And this is what I did the first year, and in my other, I was saying, well, I'll explore some new things. So I took a class in Chinese brush painting at the Art Association. And I discovered that I really didn't want to do Chinese brush painting, but it kind of reconnected me with ink again. Because we worked with brush and ink, and it sort of was the beginning of my getting back into doing some more things with lettering, some more things with calligraphy, and then these were just kind of abstract drawings that I made with natural materials that I gathered on the ground. And then I took those, after that was over, I took the pieces and I did, so this was exhibited at Sasaki Associates, which is an architectural firm in Watertown. And so I put them on all these panels, and that's a close-up of one of them. And then this is another Maudsley piece. This was called Whispered Fragments, and there are lines from John Greenleaf Whittier hanging from the tree. And this started when a friend of mine, actually Kathy was here, gave me a catalog from an art institute of Chicago, and it had a picture of a Japanese screen, and it was branches, it was like trees, and then these little white strips of paper with poems hanging from it. So the first thing I did from that was I did a project with the Literary Festival and the middle school students in Newburyport, and we did poetries. And they wrote poems on Tyvek, and we hung them all around. And then that kind of gave me the idea to do this at Mom's Life. And what I did was I went and I read through, I went online and I read for Project Gutenberg, and I read lots and lots and lots of Whittier. And I didn't really read it for content, I just used it to try to find lines that I could pull out. And I wanted lines that would make people think of, that would somehow express the feelings of how people would feel in Mom's Life, or whatever. And that got me into, all these things are slowly kind of getting me back into bringing more lettering back into my work. And I'm able to go back to it with a much more open attitude, I think, than I was before. So where I kind of felt like I was pinning myself in the corner, I don't feel like that anymore, however I do it. So I've also done a lot of work with digital. I just had this here. This is my, I have a big screen on my computer. I work standing up. But the reason I wanted to put this, because it's amazing, I've done a lot with flower imagery and things in the computer, and what has actually surprised me was I feel that sort of sense of connecting to the mystery of nature and all of that I feel when I'm handling the actual materials. I feel the same way in front of my computer screen. I really feel like, which is, seems like it shouldn't fit, but it does, for me at least. And so the next thing I did, so this is the only thing, one of the things that I produced that actually is an extended series that I've done in the last several years. And this is, these are images created from photographs of flowers with lines from poems by Emily Dickinson. And I did the first one, I just kind of, I wanted to take a picture for May Day, and I took a picture of the Pierre's plant that we had. I played with it and got that image there, just sort of. And then this was a line, The Wonders Never Drew was a line from Emily Dickinson that I had always really liked. And I thought, let's see if we can put them together. So I hand-lettered them, brought them in, and kind of put it together in Photoshop. And so what I did then was I went through and I got a copy of the complete poems of Emily Dickinson. And I did sort of similar to what I did with Whittier. It was kind of like a grazing. I wasn't reading the poems for content. I was just trying to find lines. And I looked for lines that didn't have any, that I liked the way they sounded, that were the right length, and that didn't have any associations with seasons or colors or plants or anything that you would put an image with necessarily, so that it could be paired with whatever image I chose. And I feel like, I think her words are so sharp and crystalline, which I think that the kind of sharpness of the images I like. But there's also a lot of ambiguity in her poetry, which I felt, again, the flower images I think are something that are somewhat recognizable, but not always completely recognizable. That's a hydrangea. And the next one is, this is a chicory. So what I've done is I have them that they're framed and that they can be exhibited, and I have been exhibited. But I also, my latest thing is to put them into a book. And so I seem like I keep coming back to the whole book thing. You know, I can't quite let it go. And so this is something that I've done print on demand, which means that every copy is printed one at a time. And I do this through online company. And what the good thing about it is that you only print one copy at a time, so you're not investing a whole lot of money. The bad thing is that the per cost copy of each book is pretty expensive, so it makes it a little harder to figure out exactly how to sell it, say like in a retail setting, which is where people expect books to be. But I think there are 30 prints in that, and that's part of the series. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to close with just something from the book, and I'm going to read it, and this is sort of where I am kind of right now. And at the very end, there'll be one part, we'll just put up one more image, and I'll just so this kind of comes back to that idea of what's your instruments of joy, kind of coming back to that. Joy is what I want from my work these days. Now that I feel I have found my instruments of joy, I want to sound them with all my heart. In tune and in harmony is how I want to spend my hours. When I began in the arts, it was hard work at gaining the skills I needed to express myself. As I tried to take all I learned and make it mine, the emotional part of the equation was hard work as well. I am now in a position that it does not have to be. I have reached a level of comfort with the technical aspects of my art. I feel more creative now than I ever have in my life. I am full of ideas and possibilities. Yet after so many years of striving, it feels too simple, too lazy, selfish even. As compelled by an inner need to do my work as I am, I have never gotten completely past the idea that it is an exercise in self-indulgence. How can it be that the rest of the world is going to a job, commuting, putting in hours that are often difficult or boring or unsatisfying or all of the above, and I am playing in my studio? At 61, and it's now up one more year, I am determined to give myself permission to be as selfish as I need to be to do the work I love. I have a strong sense that it's now or never. Here's a frequent metaphor. Life is a road, a journey, a path. I've used it often and taken comfort in the idea that the journey is more important than the destination. Now I want a new word, a new metaphor, or better yet, no metaphor at all. Journey implies destination, and I see now that there is no destination, no place to get to in the artist's life. Saying or doing anything that implies that there is only gets in the way. We need to stop seeking the there. We need to live and work in the here, to be present and alive in every moment, and to allow ourselves to take joy.